Hello and welcome to Nexus Extra. Today we're looking at the recent unrest in Ecuador. Well, we did interview the country's former president, Rafael Correa, who is living in Brussels in self-imposed exile. And you can see that by following the YouTube link at the end of this program. And now we're going to be giving that interview a little bit of context and analysis with Javier Faje, who has been covering Latin American events for decades. A lot has changed over the last couple of days in Ecuador, Javier, and we're going to get to that in a minute. But first, a little bit more about that interview. We asked him if there was any truth to the allegation from Moreno that he was stirring up trouble. What did you make of his answer?
Well, I think he has a good point when he says that he has nothing to do with it, but for the wrong reasons, if you like. Indigenous people who have been in conflict with Mr. Correa for quite a while, and we can deal with that in any other context, made it very clear that this protest had nothing to do with Mr. Correa. That was clear from the very beginning. They have their own cause against President Moreno because they accused President Moreno of implementing mining projects in indigenous territories, as well as this now abolished law that suspended subsidies for fuel. The indigenous people claim that the stopping the subsidies for fuel would have affected the poorest people, particularly peasants and farmers in the countryside, which is a reason why they protested. So in many ways, and CONIAE, the big confederation of indigenous peoples in Ecuador, made it very clear that the protest had absolutely nothing to do whatsoever with Mr. Correa. Of course, it doesn't mean that followers of Mr. Correa did not take part in this demonstration. Of course they did, but since the indigenous people were at the helm of these particular protests, and they made it very clear that Correa had nothing to do with it, then, of course, Mr. Correa's statement is quite accurate in relation to that.
And Javier, he did acknowledge that the changes to the Constitution in 2018 made it impossible for him to run as president again, but he left the possibility open because he suggested that the changes were made in an atmosphere of misinformation. What do you make of that?
Well, in order to go back to the old constitution, which says that he could stand again, that a president or former president can stand for more than two consecutive periods or two periods in power, there will have to be another change in the constitution, which means that in the next parliament, the next Congress in Ecuador, there would have to be enough majority. He would have to have enough supporters within the Congress, within the Ecuadorian parliament, to change the constitution back to what it was since 2007, when he actually changed the constitution through a constituent assembly. So yes, he could go back, but it will take a long time and a lot of sort of legalities in order for that to happen. Of course, it depends very much on how much people feel that they want him back. The fact that they have been complaining or protesting against Mr. Moreno doesn't necessarily mean that they want him back. And it will depend very much on how much his followers will have enough power within a new Congress or the next Congress to change the constitution back to allow him to stand. Otherwise, he can't do it.
And let's turn to the situation as it is now. It would appear that the indigenous protesters and others have managed to force Moreno to reinstate the fuel subsidies. Do you think that Moreno has just narrowly escaped being pushed out, or was he never in peril?
Well, it depends how we see this. In order for him to lose power legally, Congress will have to have enough votes within the parliament to impeach him and sack him. At the moment, those who were in favor of sacking him did not have enough votes to get this particular decision. So in that respect, legally speaking, he wouldn't have been able to be sacked. On the other hand, if the popular protest was so big and the armed forces took the side of the protesters, then he would have had to resign. A new election would have had to be called. So legally speaking, no, there was not enough support within the parliament to sack him. But on the other hand, the size of the protests, don't forget that he had to leave Quito, the seat of power, to go to Guayaquil because the protests were overwhelming and he would have been in danger of being sacked by these demonstrators. So legally speaking, no, there was not enough support in Congress, in the Ecuadorian Congress, to sack him. But in terms of the protests, he would be the fourth president within the next 20 years to have been sacked by the power of the protesters. So yes, in that respect, he probably would have been sacked, and and of course the armed forces would have to take the side of the protesters to make that possible.
And Javier, just a final question. Do you think that the right outcome for the country has been reached, or do you think Moreno was actually taking it into a more modern and reformed state?
Well, it depends very much what point of view one has. He moved totally opposite to Mr. Correa's policies. He was elected in 2017 under the platform, a left-wing platform of Mr. Correa, and he became really a conservative president. So in that respect, he said that he had to do that in order to correct the mistakes that were made before. On the other hand, many indigenous people believe that many of the social policies that were implemented before were betrayed by Mr. Moreno. What he's done is he's actually played for survival. He's perfectly aware that in the past, 3 presidents in the last 20 years, as I said before, were actually sacked because of these popular protests. I was in one of them in 1997, and I saw President Abdallah Bucaram lose power in 48 hours because of the protests, although in this particular case, it was Congress who sacked him. So yes, he has survived. It depends on what measures he takes in the future to make sure that this doesn't happen again. But if he has this, if he has to obey these conditions by the International Monetary Fund and to implement more austerity policies, then he would be in danger of facing new protests and he might be sacked. But I think he has actually survived this major crisis because he's aware that he could have been sacked by the power of the demonstrations in Ecuador.
Well, thank you, Javier Faje, for contributing to Nexus Extra. Appreciate your analysis. And thank you for watching. If you want to see the full interview with Rafael Correa, just press on the link below in the description.